In the aftermath of the tragedies of shootings in public schools, there have been remedies recommended for curtailing such criminal activity which too many have not thought through to their logical end. As we have pointed out many times, federal remedies for beefing up and/or supporting our local police will lead to the point where the federal government will control all local police departments. What the federal government finances, it controls. That's simple. It would be the same if a federal program were to be instituted for local schools in the name of bringing safety for our children. You may well say that what I have to say is ridiculous. However, I am simply extending out the lines to where things are going and what those who mean to rule us have in mind. It's been done before. A remedy for one disaster can lead to even a bigger disaster on at least two levels. One, if we make the schools into virtual forts with the children always under the protection of on-site police or guards, impenetrable fences around the school grounds, one entrance in and out of the building, etc., the children will be raised in an atmosphere of totalitarianism, virtual prisons that will have far more psychological impact on them than the pandemic edicts of wearing masks, social distancing, lockdowns, and other pandemic controls ever thought to be harmful on the thinking and well-being of the children. Children will be in constant fear because of the atmosphere they learn under if the schools are made over into hardened sites, totally free from harm. Then, what will become of the children after they leave the school grounds? School buses have been targets of terrorism around the world. Are we to have armed guards on the buses, bulletproof glass or no glass on the buses? What about the children that need to walk to and from home? Will they be traumatized, thinking they could be attacked at any moment because they are no longer under guard? What about the fencing around the school? Will the children be allowed outside for recess to play tag or swing or use the teeter-totters? Will the fences be the normal cyclone-type fence? If so, any shooter can shoot through these, even climb them. If not, and a solid wall is put in place, topped off with razor wire, it further enhances the idea in the mind of the students that they are confined in a prison rather than a school. What effect do you think an atmosphere like this will have on your child? For those of you who have seen old newsreels of children in totalitarian countries, recess isn't play. It's calisthenics. It's mass exercise. In this manner, the children are better kept within the sight of the teachers and guards. We could elaborate on the impact on the children even more, but let us move on to the second level of impact as a result of a federal program to protect the children. In the name of protecting the children, a desire all of us want, there are cries for a federal program to do so, since the idea is that not every school district or city can afford to make their schools 100% safe. Keep in mind that what the federal government finances, it ultimately controls. Do we really want the federal government to ultimately control our local schools? It is already bad enough that parents are concerned about what their children are being taught, concerned enough to show up at school board meetings and vote people onto the boards that are more reflective of the thinking of the parents. The federal government already has too much influence on what is taught in the schools, and flowing through the federal government are all manner of educational initiatives that come directly from the United Nations, leading our students to think more in terms of globalism rather than Americanism, to think more in terms of saving the environment rather than having the freedom to deal with one's property as they see fit. Ultimately, however, if the federal government becomes even more involved in our local schools, we shall see a system develop that only has one side to it, and that is the idea that the federal government is the solution to all problems, that the federal government is the be-all to every problem and solution, that we are a national government rather than a federal government. Ask yourself the question as to what you think American education would be like under the leadership of, say, a Biden, or similar globalist under such a condition. It is not an exaggeration to think that false history would be taught. Enough of it is false already. For instance, we were never taught in school that French revolutionaries came to the United States to overthrow the government under George Washington and organized riots and even revolutionary activity with which to do so. One such activity was the Whiskey Rebellion in western Pennsylvania. For even more examples, read To the Victor Go the Myths and Monuments. When you extend the lines, it's not an exaggeration to think that students would become programmed Marxists. In some areas, this is already a serious problem. And to think that the kids would be mixed up sexually, wondering whether they are male or female, or some weird status in between. The inevitable result would be where the children would be turned against their parents. This is always a problem in a totalitarian or centralized government, and woe to the parent who may not like the man who's president. And by the way, since we are protecting the children from gun violence, it will be carried a step further, where the schools will want to know the daddies who have a gun at home. And what kind of gun is it? The ultimate end of federal centralization of education is a dictatorship. Parents will have little say in their children's education. Oh, they will be organized into parent-teachers associations, but these will be arms of the state, not the parents. So, in the name of protecting our children, we would ultimately see something even worse than what we are trying to prevent. What every remedy the local citizens support to protect their children, the one thing they must not do is to allow the federal government to gain control over their local schools. Parents, for those of you who have your children in public schools, make sure your school board is constitutionally minded. If they're not, work to make the school board more constitutionally minded through education or voting the left-leaning individuals out. Parents must maintain their local control, not government. But the best control parents can exhibit is to place their children in private education, particularly homeschooling. There's too much of an idea that homeschooling is inadequate, but there are many good programs one can use. The best, in our opinion, is Freedom Project Academy. Our country was largely started by men who were homeschooled. Most of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were homeschooled, either entirely or substantially. Many of our first presidents were homeschooled, starting with our first president, George Washington. Homeschooling produces independent thinkers, people who know how to think, not what to think. Independent thinkers started our country, and independent thinkers will save it.